She speaks about constructionism and microworlds as part of the 21st century learning activity to impact student engagement and confidence in physics.
Okay, just as we start, I should probably point out, I'm going to hold the microphone in my right hand, but I'm also right-handed, so I'm going to keep on swapping it over. It's because I have a tremor in my left hand. I promise I'm not that nervous. It just does it. Just so you know. I should say that very much like Anna's talk earlier, I'm actually presenting the work of a student here who was hoping to be here and had been planned to come here, but he is a part-time student on a Masters in Technology and Learning at Trinity College Dublin. His supervisor is Tangney, and at the last minute, Conor's work required him to go to America. So he flew in the opposite direction to me. So he really wanted to be here, and I'm going to do the best that I can to try and present his work. So we're looking at constructionism and microworlds as part of a 21st century learning activity to impact student engagement and confidence in physics. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to start off with a little bit of background, and this is the stuff that I'm particularly familiar with, so if you've got questions about that, it should be good at being able to answer those questions. So this is a photograph, we just pulled off the internet, to be honest, of education, well, a class of students from around the turn of the last century, so about 100 years ago. This is what the classroom looked like. Very familiar in the UK, very much the case in Ireland. If you were to replace those wooden desks and put in some Formica style desks like these, there probably wouldn't be very much of a difference actually in the classroom in Ireland, in a secondary school classroom in Ireland today. We still see the children sitting in rows. We still see them copying down the notes from the teacher from the board. The teacher is very much still seen as the font of knowledge, and they're transmitting their knowledge, their information, to the students who are writing it down, copying it down, and they then need to learn that, very much regurgitated into the exams. I worked briefly in a secondary school in Ireland, and I think upset is probably the right word to say when I heard that the students were learning all the possible exam questions they could be asked in their English literature exam, their final examination, their terminal examination. And they were learning to write the possible essay answers. And they were learning those essays so they could walk into the exam and write those essays out. And I just thought, that's not education. Not for me. That's not what learning is about. Okay? I'm not saying that happens all the time and everywhere, but that was just one case that really struck me. So, in Ireland, in second level education, we are currently trying to go through a bit of a transformation, actually, in the vision of education. Trying to move towards more 21st century learning. Students who are learning in this type of format aren't gaining the types of skills that employers want. Okay? And so in the junior cycle, which is the first 3 years of secondary school, between the ages of 12 and 15. We're having a change in terms of the way in which the curriculum works. We're moving away from our siloed subjects. We're attempting to move away from our siloed subjects. We're attempting to reform the assessment system. So they have an exam at the end of the 3 years, which is an important, potentially terminal exam for these students if they don't continue on with their education to the age of 18. And so these different reforms are happening, and that very much lays the context then for this, which is a Bridge 21 model of 21st century learning. We were actually developing this model in Trinity College Dublin before these reforms were announced, and they very neatly fitted. Okay? Now the Bridge 21 model is founded on social constructivist and constructionist principles. And I'm really actually delighted to be able to present it here, because I think it resonates a lot with what's going on in the school here in Thailand. Okay? So it's a technology-mediated approach to learning. Team-based learning is really important, and I'll talk about the teams in a moment. We've got project-based learning being a key component. The learning space is also key. You saw the rows of desks before, okay, we're wanting to move away from that, so how do we do that? I mentioned teamwork, we've got mastery and goal orientation, okay, rather than just being able to repeat out some information. Social learning is really important. The teacher plays the role of a facilitator and mentor, and also what we were hearing a lot about yesterday was reflection. Okay, thinking back on our give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. The team-based model of learning actually is very largely informed by the World Scout Foundation and their patrol system, where you have a leader, okay, and people take different roles and responsibilities. What we found was that if you go into a classroom in Ireland and you see a teacher engaging their students in group work, what the teacher does is they turn around to the students and goes, now work as a group. How do you know how to work? They establish what the different roles, they establish for themselves what the different roles should be in the team. Different people take different responsibilities within the team. This is really important. So this is just an example of one team working at a computer. I also said the space was really important. This is a picture of our lab school at Trinity College Dublin. The space was purposefully designed to look nothing like a classroom. Okay? Each of the teams has its own pod. And you'll notice there the team that you can see there, they're kind of sectioned off a little bit from the rest of the room to give them a little bit of sense of privacy. But also they can easily move in and out. You see lots of people walking around the place. People often pop their heads over to see what other people are up to. Okay? That idea of this slightly more different, slightly flexible space is really important. As I said, the teacher able to do this. I find it very difficult. I'd be on tiptoes. But he's actually standing outside the pod because that's the student space. Okay? We're trying to empower the students to be active learners. And at the end of every Bridge 21 learning activity, we ask the students to give presentations. Believe it or not, the chap here, he looks very smart. He looks like he could be in his 20s, he's actually 15. And he's busy setting up his presentation for his team. Okay? And at the end of every day, at the end of every session, every week, the teams have to present back on what it is they've been working on. Really importantly, every member of the team has to stand up and they have to say what they've done to contribute. Okay? So we think kind of a team of 5 students working together. One of them will just sit back and let everybody else do it. Okay? Because they have to stand up and say what they've done and take some responsibility for it. That really doesn't happen. It might happen once. A team might let them get away with it once. They won't do it again. Okay? So the presentation is really important, to talk about work in progress, to share what you're doing, which is very important for Constructionist principle, and for people to be able to learn from each other, and just like we're doing here, ask questions of each other, and start stimulating minds and getting people to think in different ways and different directions. So one of the things that we realised when trying to take this approach into classrooms is that while we as a group of researchers and teachers had a really clear understanding of what we were doing in Bridge 21 Classroom, how does that translate into a teacher's classroom? How do they know what to do? And being involved in teaching on the Masters in Technology and Learning, whenever we introduce Constructionism to our students, they always go, that's a fantastic idea, it's great. I have no idea how to actually do it in my classroom. Okay? So we use this as our lesson activity template. So every lesson starts with a setup. So we might be setting up our teams, getting them to identify their leaders. We have a warm-up where we're trying to thinking. We're looking for the right answers all the time. We're trying to get them to think a little bit more outside the box. One of our favourite activities, students love it. We give them orange. We give them a little whiteboard, some pens. We ask them to come up with as many ways as possible that they could use an orange. They have 1 minute to do it, and they have to come up with as many ideas as they can in the team. And they start off going, well, you can eat it, you can peel it, you can maybe stick a straw in it and drink it. Oh, you can throw it at someone. And they go, what else can you do? They come along, and as a facilitator, I'd say, well, what something crazy you could do with it? One team decided that their best idea was that they could wrap it up in some clothes and pretend that it was a baby and take it everywhere and look after their orange. That was quite crazy. Another team thought they could launch it up into space. So we started thinking it a little bit more differently, a little bit more openly. So once we've done a short little setup and warm-up activity, they're then given a very broad and open problem, which we ask them to define as a team. What is it that they're going to look at? What are they interested in following up? Okay. This may involve them doing a bit of research, and at this point they now need to do a bit of convergent thinking, because they need to agree as a team what it is that they are going to do, what they're going to focus on. They then need to do some planning. How are they going to do this? What are the tasks, what are the roles, and what is the schedule? Schedule is really important. Deadlines are really important. They have to present something at the end of the day. What are they going to present? They only have 1 hour to complete this activity. How are they going to get it done? Okay. They then go off and do their creation, they're creating, they're reviewing, they're reflecting, and then, as I said, they present. And after the presentations, we give them about 5 minutes as a team to reflect on their experience, what they've learned and what they've done, and then ask them to do a bit of individual reflection. And sometimes we see what you were finding, that in some of those documents, they're saying, oh, our team's great, we're really efficient. That's the whole team one. And then someone's writing, I felt really left out. I didn't really get involved. So-and-so is taking over. As a teacher, that's really great information, because you then know the next day that team you might just pop into and ask them, how's everything going on? How are they organising that team? But it allows you as a teacher not to just constantly be hawking over every single group and making sure they're all managing themselves. And we also ask the students in that reflection to then think about what it is that they want to work on the next day or in the next lesson. And we can start that lesson then by presenting those back to them and asking them, what is it that you're going to work on today, just to remind them. So, this research, which I'm probably going to zip through now, I want to talk a little bit about Conor's motivation behind doing this research, which is focused on physics. Physics, if we look at literature, is perceived as a difficult and abstract subject by second level students. Transmission teaching methods, as I was saying, which happen a lot in Ireland, are not best suited to support student engagement or conceptual understanding in physics. We've got a lot of abstract concepts flying around. And when we're in a transmission mode, and rote learning is going on, we're writing these things down, we're memorizing them, but do we actually understand what these things are about, how they are relevant to the real world? So, literature will tell us that real-world contextualized learning is important for developing understanding and problem-solving skills, and that simulation technologies, as we know, are great for visualizing abstract and concrete models. And they can help create a cognitive dissonance and discrepant events, which can be really useful for learning. I don't know how many of you have been in a science classroom, but often students come in with really strongly held beliefs about the ways in which the world works. And sometimes you get them to engage with a computer simulation, and they go, well, the simulation's wrong. Because I know that's not how it works. Okay? So it's a really interesting teaching opportunity. In terms of, the other thing that I should say, that in Ireland we have decreasing numbers of students who are considering careers in science, particularly in physics, and also many teachers who actually teach physics are not specialist trained. So they're chemistry teachers or biology teachers, because we don't have enough physics teachers. They're the ones who are asked to teach physics, so they're not domain specialists either. And in in primary school and in the junior cycle in secondary school, science is taught as a general subject. Okay, so they may not be getting that much physics either. Okay, so the second motivation around this, I mentioned right at the beginning, the attitudes that are required in the knowledge society that we're all now supposed to be a part of. This was set out by the European Commission in 2008, and Ireland really started taking notice a few years later. Okay, and as part of this, we need a number of different support systems. We probably can't read those ones at the bottom, but from a school and nation point of view, we need standards and assessments, we need curriculum and instruction, we need professional development and learning environments that suit all these types of things. Okay, sitting in rows of desks doesn't suit our 21st century teaching and learning. But as with all things, when we're asking teachers to make a change, we need scaffold, support, and that's where the Bridge 21 model comes in. The third motivation is how we look at ICT and the way in which it's used in the classroom. And there were references made earlier to the technocentric approach. Okay? We've got all of our students sat in rows at desks, handwriting. We do the same thing with laptops. And we get them to follow what the teacher's doing on the big screen at the front of the room. Okay? Well, it's all about learning the technology rather than learning about the processes or the systems that are underneath that. So what we're looking to do, and I don't know how familiar you are with the SAMIA model, I can go into more detail later, but essentially at the bottom of the SAMIA model for integrating ICT into education, we have where the technology simply acts as a direct substitute for what we would normally do. Okay, so we might ask the question, well, why bother with the technology? And at the top end, we have redefinition. The technology allows us to do something that we just would not otherwise be able to imagine. Okay? And what we're trying to do is we're trying to work in this transformation phase, okay? Where the technology can allow for significant task redesign or allow us to do things that were just previously inconceivable. It's very difficult to do it in that type of format. So, Bridge 21 is a pragmatic model for the 21st century teaching and learning at the SAMIA transformation layer. So this study, and I've got just under 5 minutes if I'm correct, Carol?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, perfect. So we're taking all these different components together. We're taking microworlds rather than simulations, because they provide obviously a low floor, high ceiling and highly interactive environment. And what that does is it allows students to create and test their models. We're even thinking about some of the earlier presentations, sometimes deconstruct. So we use the PhET microworld, which is a project at the University of Colorado, and hopefully, if I've got my volume on, sorry, you will hear Conor explaining what the PhET software allows you to do.
A number of key criteria. Through a simple user interface, it provides a low-floor entry, which allows a user to quickly start constructing simple circuits. The system models real-world behaviors where parameters can be adjusted, resulting in an immediate response to the circuit components and shown in circuit outputs. It supports a high degree of interactivity. The user has access to measuring tools such as a voltmeter and an ammeter, allowing them to measure and to test the circuits that they have constructed. The PhET environment supports the construction of more complex circuits. For example, the addition of extra components, the use of AC and DC current sources.
So essentially what PhET allows you to do is explore. Okay. So the context that this study was conducted in was the activities were done in the lab school with students from 5 different Irish public schools, so 38 students in total. They're all in their 4th year of secondary school, between the ages of 15 and 16 years old, 41% of them were girls. The girls ratio is an important thing just to be aware of. In Ireland there are a lot of schools that are single sex, only girls, only boys. Okay, so we sometimes mix up the schools. Participants had limited exposure to physics in previous years, so before the age of 15 they had quite limited exposure to physics. And each of the groups, there were roughly 10 students in each group, participated in a 1-day workshop, and there was 4 of those workshops in total. At the stations you see in that first photograph, there was 2 students working per station. Initially the plan was that actually you would have 3 or 4 students working together, but actually we found it was just unmanageable in the pilot stage. So we went down to 2 students at each station, and they've got these really large monitors. You see that they're working with a laptop, but it's hooked up to a large monitor, and one of the ideas behind that was so that they could better share with other people in the room what they were doing. Okay, so the learning activities very much followed that model that I mentioned earlier. The warm-up activities were focused on having a little play around and explore with the PhET construction kit, and introduction to some of the concepts around current, voltage and resistance. And they were introduced to parallel and series circuits. Okay. Their main task that they were asked to do, this was just before Christmas, a year ago. Their challenge was to design a set of Christmas tree lights and explain why they've chosen that particular arrangement. Okay. And obviously, as I said, they had that knowledge of series and parallel circuits, and that was one of the things we were looking for. The student presentations, which we asked them to do at the end, we asked them to explain what they chose and why they chose it. So this is an explanation of one group as to why they chose a parallel circuit, and then they give an explanation about how they did it. And there's a picture there of the circuit they created. So that group chose a parallel circuit, whereas another group decided to put their Christmas tree lights in series. And they actually made theirs in the shape of a Christmas tree, which you might not quite be able to see there. And so then, in a reflection phase, open question and answer phase, they were asked, so why parallel, why series, what happens when? I'm sure that those of you who put up Christmas trees over the past 10 plus years, okay, will know that feeling of going through the Christmas tree lights and trying to find the one bulb that is broken. Okay? If you manufacture your lights in series, if one bulb goes, the whole lot will turn off. Okay? So there were discussions about, well, why would manufacturers do that? What would be the advantages for a manufacturer to do that? So we started to move off physics a little bit, think about broader questions. And then they were introduced to this question about car headlights. How did they think car headlights were wired? So we're extending on a little bit further. So the research question Conor was interested in was, what was the impact upon student engagement and confidence in physics? Because what we know is that this is already low. And what we're trying to do is increase it. Okay? So methodology involved mixed method data collection, quantitative and qualitative data. He used what he's termed as the PTAS instrument. It's taking the MTAS instrument, which is quite well used in mathematics and technology education. It's quite a short questionnaire, which is great for the students. And it's quite easily modified for different technologies. And what Conor did was he modified it then for physics. And it allows you to measure 5 subscales. So they're just color-coded in there, so you can see all the responses to questions and attitudes to learning physics with technology. So his data analysis, with all this quantitative and qualitative data, was very involved. I'm not going to go into that, but just so you can see, there was a lot going on there. And the qualitative data, what was interesting was he analysed it in several different ways. He was looking for those extra evidence of the different PTAS submeasures, but he was also looking for evidence of the Bridge 21 approach, constructionist learning, and what was going on in the lesson design, as well as some open coding. So his stats, his pre and post tests, showed him that yes, there was a significant increase across all measures except for technology confidence. One of the ways we might explain that is it was quite a simple little tool to use. They didn't really need to learn very much to be able to access it, which is great if we're thinking about that invisible computer point of view. And this set of data, and I'm not going to go into detail on any of it because it's all in the paper. There's lots more detail in the paper. But what we can see here is that where you see on the far left-hand side, you have 27 and 39. What you've got actually there are 4 measures of the same thing, AE, effective engagement. And the first one is where there were positive responses in a school environment. What were their positive responses in terms of school? The second one was what was their negative responses in terms of school. That's high, that's the 27. At the post-test, we were then looking at their experience of Bridge 21. And again, the first column there, the high one at 39, is the positive in the Bridge 21 experience. And then the one that's marked as 0 as being very low is their negative experience in terms of Bridge 21. And what we see there is their Bridge 21 experiences are very different to their school experience. And the qualitative data very much backs that up. The interviews and things that the students are actually telling us very much backs that up. And in many respects, there's no better way to answer the research, which was really important to Conor. When the student said, I've always hated part of all the science of circuits and stuff, and I actually enjoyed what I was doing today. So previously he'd always hated it, he quite enjoyed it today. And there's a question that we can ask about that. Is it just because this was a once-off activity? Was there a kind of wow factor about this? You know, this is great, we're out of school, we're having a bit of fun, we're doing things in different ways. Could this actually make a difference if this was part of a daily school activity? In terms of their confidence in physics, we've got one student saying that the equations are a lot more easier now that we've actually put them into practice. Another student says, I thought it was maths before, but it's not all maths. Coming back to Anthony's presentation earlier. You know, so actually the fear of maths was putting some students off physics. And they weren't aware of that there's actually conceptual understanding to get to grips with as well. So one of the questions, if I may beg one additional minute, because I know I'm on time now. One of the things I wanted just to very briefly address was actually a reviewer's comment on the paper, which was, this is all very nice and good, all very lovely, but how does this relate to constructionism really? Okay, so what are the implications of this type of learning activity in the Bridge 21 model of constructionist learning? And for me, well, first of all, we've got the technology mediated part, but that's very familiar in terms of constructionism. The other thing we really strongly see is this notion of the learning space. And from what I've seen, the Bridge 21 model in action, teachers talking about using it in their classrooms, the learning space, the movement of chairs, the rearranging of furniture makes a big difference. And it's often the first thing that teachers try out in their classrooms. Okay? Noise levels go up. Teachers get terrified of that. Okay? But they then see the benefits for their students. And then teamwork is the other thing that I would really like to encourage the constructionist community to really think about more deeply. And just coming back to that point about the space, rooms, in the room we don't have them in the pods here. There was a lot of students getting up and moving around and looking to see what other people were doing, and they might just watch over their shoulder for a little while. And then they'd ask them some questions. Why are you doing it that way? Because we're doing it like this. Ongoing sharing in constructionist learning, and that's really important. And that's what that type of space can provide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carina. So, I don't know if I remember it correctly. The groups of students were boys only and girls only?
No,
or was it mixed?
we mix them. So if they're coming from single-sex schools,
Yes.
what we actually try and do is we mix the students between schools. So we'll have half of a class and half of a class and mix them one day, and then take the other halves and mix them the following day. That's what we try and do.
Why?
Well, one of the things, and we do this with mixed schools as well. So in the larger sessions that we do in the lab, we'll have students in for 4 days in total. And one of the things is that if you're part of a class, all day, every day, you get to know who you like, who you don't like, who's good to work with, who the brainiac is who kind of do the work for you, who the slacker is. If you're suddenly presented with half your team of people you don't know, you need to start forging those relationships. You have to talk to each other. And we found it really, really helps because they're learning together. There's no preconceptions of what people can and cannot do. And when we ask them to take their roles, we always have one team leader. We ask them to work out as a team who is going to be their team leader. And the different roles that are allocated within the group, people will volunteer or they will be volunteered to take that particular role. But taking that role only means you have responsibility for it. So I might have responsibility for a particular role, but I might ask Gerald to help me with it. And that's absolutely fine, they can do that. And they can sometimes do that more comfortably when they're not working with their direct peers. Also, we don't intentionally allow friends to work with each other. So sometimes in those 4-day sessions, we'll have students come over and go, can we swap teams because my friend is because when you leave school, you don't get that option. Okay? And it's important to be able to work with different people with different skills, with different talents. And sometimes it's important to learn how to work with people you don't necessarily like, and to learn how to get on with them. So that's a lot of different reasons as to why we mix up the schools.
Can you tell us more about research student?
So Conor is a student, part-time student on the Masters in Technology and Learning course.
Right.
Brendan is his supervisor. And so I've been doing a lot of work in the lab school, but also with the teachers implementing it in their classrooms. And that's the bridge, as you might want to call it, between all the different
This is a previous role. You no longer play this role now, or you still?
Oh, no, I'm still quite heavily involved with the Bridge 21 team, although I'm in the UK.
Where is Bridge 21 fit in? Is it an external initiative that's looking in on how teaching is occurring?
No, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make a change in the way in which teaching is occurring. But it started out in this lab school environment because we wanted to play around and tinker and develop it.
Yes.
And now we're in a position, because of the reforms that are coming from governments in terms of Irish education, we're actually really in a great position to be able to start to introduce that model into schools. So a couple of years ago we had 10 schools that were involved with us that maybe grew and grew and grew again. And typically you get 1 or 2 teachers in the school who get involved, and then it proliferates out through the school as other teachers go, that looks interesting. Or students come to their class and there's a buzz, and they go, why are you also?
But it's rather coincidental that it's about physics, because you don't have a physics.
I don't have a physics background, my husband is a theoretical physicist, and that is where the connection stops. So I asked him all the questions that I need to hear.
We have another question.
To know maybe some idea of how we can apply this into some kind, maybe in high school physics, when it's not that much of the simple stuff, but much harder topic to try to learn. So we want to know some idea how to apply that to.
So the reason why this is with students, right, that they haven't learned this stuff before. There was a little bit of time just to start off to find out what existing knowledge they did have, and it varies a little bit between students, between schools, but they really had quite a low level. What the model has, that little cycle of different phases, that's a general model that teachers are using all the way through from primary schools through to the age of 18. And they're just using those as little filling points. Those are kind of the markers. These are the types of things we need to do to this type of learning. And they fill it with subject-appropriate content, types of things that they think are valuable. And the teachers that we've worked with in schools, they'll often try some of it out, and they'll kind of try it gently at first, okay? And then they've had a bit of experience with it, and then they get a little bit bolder, a little bit braver, and they go, right, next time around, we're going to try something a bit more challenging. And maybe I'm going to feel a bit uncomfortable, a bit out of my comfort zone. But actually, generally, the teachers feel a bit uncomfortable doing this because it's very different to the way in which they teach normally. But the model is designed so that it can be applied in any subject, not just physics, not just science subjects, in English, in history,